We're back from Peru, and I wanted to jump on here and talk about this Barbault's basket configuration that perfects tomorrow. I think that we've already been experiencing some of this because it's these slower outer moving planets that have been kind of already in this configuration. But I think the main thing that's coming through here is the Pluto Jupiter opposition. And that one, once it perfects, it will move to from a gibbous phase opposition to a full phase opposition. And I think that's significant in how we will experience it. The gibbous phase opposition has a little bit of insecurity built into it. And one of the things I want to say about this whole configuration is it's a lot of young energy. And the reason I say that is when you look at the phasal relationships, we look at the slower moving planets and then how they are interacting with the other planets that are moving away from them. And so I'm going to put this up here on the screen and we can talk about I can kind of show you what I'm talking about. Um, I'm going to change this share so that I can be in the corner here. Here we go. Okay. So when you look at Pluto, Pluto is the slowest moving planet. It's about a 250-year cycle, and Neptune is about 184 years. And so when Pluto moved away from Neptune after their conjunction, I'm not sure exactly when that happened, but we're in now what we call a crescent phase sextile. And the crescent phase is well, let's get into that here in a minute. And then let's just point out that this is also so Neptune is 184 years and uh, Uranus is 84 years. And so this is also a crescent sextile. And then we have Uranus to Jupiter, which is Jupiter is a 12-year cycle. It spends just about a year in each sign. And so Uranus is the slower moving. So we also have a crescent phase sextile. And then the opposition here between Pluto and Uranus right now is in the gibbous phase. And so this is the only mature aspect. When you get to that opposition phase, it's like a full moon. It illuminates something. And I think that's part of what I want to talk about here. Because I think Jupiter is the key to this, to how this is working. And a lot of these other players, as slow as they are kind of supporting roles, and it's stuff that goes on in the background. When I look at astrology, I look at these slower moving outer planets as these processes that are going on under the surface in the background. The deeper they are, the more unconscious they are. And uh, it is very subtle. And with Jupiter here, it's very big. And whatever Jupiter touches makes it very big. And so this opposition with Pluto, I think, is going to be a big thing. And I can actually share a story about this. I was we just got back from Peru. I went and we play in dart leagues, and we were playing on this pickup tournament, and it's a blind draw. And so I got paired up with another guy, and for the first game in the series, we had a bye, which means we weren't playing. There was an odd number of teams, so we got set aside and started playing separately. So we went out on this balcony and we were talking. I didn't know him from anybody else. And he says, "Well, what do you do?" And I told him I'm an astrologer. And he started to talk to me about uh, how he believed in the flat Earth theory. And, I know there's a lot of people out there that believe this, and I don't particularly buy into that theory. I'm an astrologer, and it was quite interesting because in the past, my instinct would have been to try and convince him otherwise. And I, in fact, just had this experience with another person recently, probably 2 months ago, where he was trying to convince me of the flat earth theory. And I tried to push back and I tried to argue with him logically, and debate him. And what I found is it just solidified the way that he understood it. And the reason that I'm looking at this is this, Pluto can be a compulsion, and Jupiter, is about our beliefs. And oftentimes, Sagittarius can show us where we want to be right. And, we're trying to convince and convert other people. And so I came to this place last night where I was just able to observe this. And I think that this sextile between Uranus in in Gemini and Jupiter here, and this opposition, it was just fascinating because the more that I listened to him and I didn't really try to interject, the more that he kept moving into it and moving into it. And then at a certain point, he stopped and he says, "Well, what do you think about all this?" And rather than argue with him, I started to tell him, I spent a lot of time really invested in politics, and thinking, that I was right and wanting to be right and trying to convince and convert. I have a new moon in Sagittarius, so I'm not foreign to this. I also have a stellium in the ninth house, and so I just told him, it's not something that I found great satisfaction with, and it always tends to bring me down. And, I know there's a bunch of different opinions out there, mine, whatever, but that's how I feel. And I kind of got up and walked away. And I was really kind of proud of myself because rather than getting trapped in the story here, this Pluto trine Uranus, I feel like I was able to kind of back up and have that Uranus type higher perspective and see it from a different view where I could see where it was going. And I knew that the more that I tried to convince and convert him, the firmer it would set him into his beliefs and his values. And so I was able to kind of sidestep the whole thing. And this freedom, I felt this freedom from it, which I can't quite describe, but I'm going to try, because in the past I would have felt like I was stuck in this position that I needed to convince and convert him to my way of thinking because it would be a threat. His beliefs would be a threat. And we talked a little bit about this back when we had that stellium of planets in Aries. And to just be able to sit in your quiet presence and that sense of peace at no at who you are and not needing to get validation from the outside or convert, and to have that relationship with myself from the inside, because I had parts come up with that wanted to engage and wanted to convince and convert. I keep coming back to that phrase, but it's true. I mean, I did have that come up and I thought about it. And I was able to have that presence without reacting, you know. And I think that that's a lot of what this cycle is about. This Neptune Saturn new phase conjunction that happened back in February. We have, a new phase still. Saturn is getting ready to turn retrograde coming up on the 27th of this month. And um, so it's reaching the end and slowing, and I just spent some time traveling in Peru, and a Saturn Neptune conjunction. We were at Machu Picchu and some of these other Inca ruins, and looking at stuff, these terraces that were built into the mountainside, the apus is what they call them in Peru, and they've been there for hundreds of years, and they built them with such precision that they're able to withstand the erosion of the water hitting them and running down them over all this time. And I couldn't help but think, this is symbolic of the emotional waters that are rushing through our inner structures within our mind. Saturn is our inner structures, and with Neptune there, it's dissolving some of these rigid structures that were containing us and keeping us stuck and trapped before. So we need to recreate these structures in our mind so that it can open up and give us a little more freedom and space to operate within. And that I see this in this symbology here. You've got Saturn and Neptune both in Aries about our identity, and Saturn is the structures, and Neptune is the water that dissolves away the meanings and the things that aren't true. And Uranus down here is these stories that play out, the parts that come up. If we don't convince this guy, then what is he going to think? We're going to be wrong. I'm going to lose connection. And really, the biggest connection that needs to remain true for me is myself, with myself. And so I was able to sit back and think, what do I want to do here? And it's to be able to have that sacred pause we've talked about before, so that you can really choose. Because if you're reacting, you're not choosing, you're allowing a fear to take over, because a fear comes from a lack, this vacuum that I always look and picture it behind us somewhere, where we're reacting to try and close that gap that's there. And so it's an energy that's just sucking into this vacuum. And so anyway, that's my story with this. But I think that Jupiter being the key here is going to illuminate places where we're still acting unconsciously. And that's where, what this whole series I feel is about, is all these supporting sextiles, is about finding that 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 meaning, that purpose, and strengthening our roots into this new structure that we're starting to develop. The other aspects that we've got are first quarter trines. You've got a first quarter trine between uh, Pluto and Uranus, and you've got a first quarter trine between Neptune and Jupiter. And first quarter is calling us to have faith, to take action before something is established, before we have evidence of something. This is still in the waxing phase, and that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this new energy that we've got. We've got crescent sextiles, and we've got first quarter trines, and these easy aspects easy is a relative term when you're talking about outer planets, these slower moving planets, because they're all, pretty heavy hitters, and it all involves this deep and semi, at least, unconscious material for us. And so, to take action, we're here to establish security. That first quarter phase starts with Cancer. And so that kind of brings me to this Mercury, which has been going retrograde in Cancer for a while now. It's going to station direct shortly. But then Jupiter has just recently spent a year in Cancer. And so it's about this establishing of this safety and security. Am I safe to have different beliefs than other people? And will I lose that connection? And what's the old story that plays out in my part system, my inner collective, that brings up this fear of being isolated and being alone and being unique? And when we're operating from that sense of fear, like I said, there's a lack and there's no presence. And so the goal is to stay with that fear long enough to open up space to make choices, to make conscious choices, to act with presence and compassion. And, I didn't try to make the guy feel stupid because he believes something different than I believe. I was just able to say, you know what? I've found out something about myself is that I get uncomfortable with these situations where I always want to feel like I'm right. And so I just don't like the way that I feel with it. And so I backed off and I chose not to engage. And I think that, it's quite interesting because on this channel we've also talked about CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress syndrome, and that is a lot different than traumatic stress syndrome, or you know the post-traumatic stress syndrome, because that's like a reaction to a traumatic event. And complex PTSD is just this buildup of all of these smaller events that end up compounding and building into something bigger. And so, if you're like me and you have this in your psyche, and you're going through life, it can feel like there needs to be this dramatic change. And when you start to move into this secure relationship with yourself, it can feel kind of boring and not climatic. I was journaling about this morning, this situation with this guy, and I thought to myself, this is kind of a victory. But last night it didn't really feel like a victory, like, oh my god, this is exciting, look what I've done. I was able to go through this and not react. It's always in this hindsight and looking back that you realize, that it was just this normal interaction between two people, only it went so different this time than it would go before. And I think this is such a great example of the Mars new phase to Uranus in Gemini, and that trine between Pluto. Because what I found was empowerment through objectivity, being able to sit back and look at what do I really want to get here and what's important to me. And what was important to me last night was keeping my autonomy, my sense of self and my relationship, and not needing to lose myself to go into this this argument that I knew I wasn't going to win. It wasn't going to be satisfying for either side, right? Because I'm going to tell him my side, he's going to tell me his side, and we're both going to end up walking away thinking, that's not that this guy just doesn't understand. So I wasn't threatened by the fact that he wasn't going to understand and that he would have a different opinion. And I was able to stay present within myself and be able to uh, can maintain that relationship with the parts that even would when they come up and think, we need to convince this guy. And anyway, I'm getting off track here, but I really think that there's a lot of potential here, but I want to warn against everybody thinking, oh, this is just going to change everything, and all of a sudden we're going to wake up tomorrow morning or the day after tomorrow, and everything's going to be blissful and peaceful. I don't think that's the way this stuff works. I often describe the crescent phase as using my wife's greenhouse as an example. She would grow tomato starts, and I've told this story before, in the greenhouse under artificial light in the wintertime. And they would grow up and fall over because they'd want to reach the light so much that they'd grow straight up and they'd be too skinny and weak and they'd fall over. So she put this oscillating fan on there. The crescent phase is a struggle. It's like this irritating struggle that we need to overcome, and it's an internal struggle. It's an internal energy, a yin energy that's inside, and um, as we go through the struggle, we strengthen our values and our meaning and our purpose. And when I use these tomato starts as an example, with the fan blowing on them, they would root up and their stems would get thicker. And by the time they started growing up to the light, they were really stout and sturdy, and they didn't worry about the blowing of the air anymore. But they were good, healthy plants. And so um, I think rather than breaking down each one of these, I wanted to kind of use that example. But there's also one other thing that I think is super noteworthy here, and that's that the nodes are getting ready to move into a new sign. So they're at that critical degree. And we're starting to culminate this year and a half transit, this 18-month transit that's been Virgo Pisces. And with Uranus squaring still here, I think that we're starting to let go of some of the patterns where we were trying to control and not have that uncertainty. I did some work with a healer in Peru. It was animal healing. And one of the things she kept talking about was, that the leading edge of evolution, I think, is being able to tolerate uncertainty. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. We're trying to unlock the wisdom of Jupiter in Leo. And what is Leo about? Leo wants recognition. Leo wants an individual creative expression. And Leo wants to be able to have that childlike joy of expression. And I think that what's going to be exposed here is where we're holding back and trying to get that out of disempowerment. And that disempowerment comes from a Pluto. That's a Scorpio Pluto archetype, is this disempowerment. And so when we're looking at this from the inside out, I think that we're going to be expressing some joy. We're going to have this optimism. We're going to have this thing, and it's going to let us know when it's not coming from this authentic place, this Aquarius, Pluto in Aquarius, this purely unique expression, this energy signature that's only ours. Like it can only come from us. And Leo and Jupiter, we're going to be expressing this from the heart. And hopefully, by the time we get through with this next year, this value, meaning, and purpose, and these strengthening of all of these roots are going to continue to expand and grow. And we're going to be able to move into a time where this just becomes second nature for us. And this new state of mind, these new structures, these new inner structures from within are able to just operate smoothly. Um, I want to come back to the terraces of Machu Picchu and the way that they built right into the mountainside. The land is kind of worthless to grow things because it's so steep. It the water rushing past it would erode the soil, and anything that you tilled up, cultivated, and tried to grow there would just get washed away. And so they spent all of this time and invested all of this time, and I feel like that's example of this crescent phase of taking advantage of these easy aspects. The sextile is an easy aspect. The shadow is not picking up that mantle or that rope or the lever or whatever you want, whatever metaphor you can insert there, and doing it. And these first quarter trines are the same thing. Jupiter to Neptune and Pluto to Uranus, they're calling for us to take action, and to take action to establish security, to establish this meaning, this purpose, this value, to root up and to really strengthen this new inner structure, because we've had this void after uh, Saturn culminated into Neptune at the very last degrees of Pisces, the very last degrees of the zodiac. And now that it's in this new phase here, we're still not able to quite see what's going to happen. Barbault, the guy that did this, was what they call a mundane astrologer, and he dealt with society at large and all of this. And as you guys know on this channel, I like to bring it on the inside. And what is the inner community doing? And what is all of this about? And that brings me to one other point I want to make is Saturn. Saturn can be about the inner community rules, and these can these can develop over time in a society. And we have a pluralistic mind. We have parts within us, and rules kind of form over time based on protection strategies that go on within our inner world. And so I think that part of what was breaking down is some of these rules. And I think that new rules are starting to come online, the more trust that builds in. And that's when I point back to this Cancer stuff. We just had a new moon in Cancer. We've got Mercury, which is traveling into the underworld in Cancer and bringing up all these places where we're trying to establish security. And what if we're able to look at these and enter a situation in a new way? Can we build the trust in the system to change the rules, to change the structures, to change how we show up? And hopefully, eventually, as this moves on, can it become instinctual? can it become part of, and that's why I'm circling this Aries stuff over here. Can it become part of just who we are? And so I'm going to stop this share, and I just can't believe how well that example came up last night when we were playing darts, and it it really felt like it was meaningful, and I wanted to share that. There's more stuff that I'll probably be sharing about Peru and my journey there. And I apologize for the videos being a little sparse towards the end, but we were coming up on our last week, and we had a lot of stuff to do. My wife had gone on her retreat, and so we spent time apart for a week. And when we got back together, we had a lot of catching up to do, and it was a lot of fun. So I'll have more to share, and maybe I'll even include some pictures of some of the adventures that we went on there. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I hope that was good for you guys. I want to just reiterate one more time. This is a very positive aspect and aspect configuration that we're going through. But I want to warn against, thinking, oh, this is just means everything's going to work out and I don't have to do anything. It requires our participation. The universe requires us to engage. And especially when you're talking about trines and sextiles, the shadow side of that is not doing it. It's not picking up the reins and guiding things along. And I think that the more that we are able to stay present and participate with our inner world, and then the more trust that comes online. And with Mercury coming up on its direct motion, and Saturn going retrograde, I think that we've got an opportunity to integrate even more here and establish even more. Um, Saturn is going to go back to 7 degrees Aries, and there's a lot of more stuff that we can talk about here. If you guys want to put in the comments things that you'd like to explore, we can do that. And of course, if you'd like a reading, we can look at how these are affecting your chart individually. And I'll put a link in there in the description to gain access to that so that you can get a reading if you'd like to. And do all the things, hit the share, the like, and subscribe, and let's continue to build this community and move forward. So thanks, guys, and I enjoy this.